is the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz of the Military Seahawkers, and joining me to talk about day 3 of the NFL Combine with the defensive ends, defensive tackles, and the linebackers, I have Mr. Rob Staton of SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, how you doing?
I'm great, Brandon. So we're 3 days through the Combine now, just 1 day to go. Today was billed as probably going to be the most exciting day, given that the defensive line is seen as the real strength of the draft. But I thought it was a little bit underwhelming. It wasn't quite as good as you expected. You know, a number of big names didn't quite hit the highs that we were hoping for. And given that expectations were so high, I don't think the class generally lived up to those lofty expectations, whereas the tight ends, the receivers, the offensive linemen, there wasn't that expectation there, and we ended up finding out there's a really deep class at those 3 positions. So maybe not quite as exciting as the last couple of days, but still a lot we can get into tonight.
Well, there does still seem to be a breadth of defensive linemen to draw from in this draft. Edge, it sounds like there may not be so much depth. And then at linebacker, I'm going through and trying to find guys that fit into the mold of a Seahawks linebacker. And apart from the guys going in the first round, there's not a lot of guys to be excited about. So I was a little bit disappointed just knowing that linebacker is such a position of need for the Seahawks, and yet there wasn't really anybody to get me excited that I know that'll be available.
Yeah, and I think familiarity was an issue today. I mean, we just know so many of these names. It wasn't a huge surprise that Rashan Gary looked superb, but everybody knows about him and expects him to go in the top 10. Nick Bosa looked really good. Again, not a big surprise there. Quinnen Williams started the day running a great 40, tying great 10-yard split. No surprises there. So a lot of the players that generally expected to do very well did. I think the other underwhelming thing about today was the number of injuries. Dexter Lawrence got injured running a fantastic 40-yard dash time, which was a 5:05. Decent split in the 1.7s as well, which for a guy at 342 pounds, there's a lot of think about Dexter Lawrence, very negative about him, but he's a fantastic athlete at that size. So it was a shame that he got hurt. Ja'Shea Polite got hurt and didn't run. Matt Wilson didn't run. Christian Miller didn't run. You know, there was a lot of names that either didn't do any of the drills or didn't run a 40-yard dash, which kind of added to some of the disappointment today. But, I think to be positive about it, here's where the good news is for Seahawks fans. The Seahawks look for very agile, athletic defensive linemen, whether they're defensive ends who can kick inside or defensive tackles. The short shuttle has been a good indicator of the kind of players that they look for. Rasheem Green ran a very good 4.39, the short shuttle a year ago. Quinton Jefferson, who's played a bit of defensive end, a bit of defensive tackle, a 4.37. Jordan Hill, a defensive tackle, a 3 technique, a 4.51. Jay Howard, a defensive tackle, a 4.47. And Malik McDowell, who was nearly 300 pounds and could play inside and out, a 4.53. They're all really, really good short shuttle times for the size. So I went through and had a look at the defensive linemen who ran similar or even better times than some of those players today. And there's a decent long list of 10 names. You've got Anthony Nelson at Iowa, who's more of a defensive end, but is perhaps big enough that he could play a little bit inside. He ran a 4.23. Rashan Gary, who's going to be a top 10 pick, he's a lock for that, ran a 4.29. It's exceptional from him at 277 pounds. Jerry Tillery could be there at the end of round 1 or even in round 2, 295 pounds, the same size as Malik McDowell, ran a fantastic 4.33. That's an excellent short shuttle time. Zach Allen, who's kind of dropped off the radar a little bit because he didn't have a great Senior Bowl, and people have been wondering how athletic he is. We kind of got some answers today. A 4.36 short shuttle at 281 pounds is fantastic. So get him back on your radar. Boston College's Zach Allen, a really good player to watch on tape and was one of the best pass rushers in college football last season. Charles Omenihu has got 36-inch arms, 280 pounds, inside-out type rusher, 4.36 in the short shuttle. That's superb. Daniel Wise, a specialist interior pass rusher, 281 pounds, ran a 4.36. That's a great time from him. John Kaminsky, bit of an under-radar, smaller school guy, 286 pounds, a 4.38. Trysten Hill, one of the stars of the day from UCF, a 4.38 at 308 pounds, showing genuine ability to be a starting NFL tackle at the next level. Kiki Kingsley had a great Senior Bowl. His tape's pretty average, but a great Senior Bowl, great workout today, a 4.46 at 288. Draymond Jones ran a 4.53. That is the same as Malik McDowell, albeit at 281 pounds, a little bit lighter there. And then Renell Wren also ran the same time as Malik McDowell in the short shuttle, But he did it with an extra 23 pounds. He weighs 318 pounds. That's an exceptional time from him. So there's a whole boatload of names for you, 10 in total, at varying points in the draft. First round, second round, middle rounds, later rounds. The Seahawks, if they want to add a defensive tackle or an inside-out rusher, will be able to find one within this draft class.
Trysten Hill's a guy that you could see even falling to the day 3 in the draft. You know, you mentioned University of Central Florida, obviously the Griffin twins that went to that same school. And he was a guy, and they brought him up on the broadcast of the fact that he wasn't even a starter on his own team. And he attributed that to the amount of depth. But when you look at the numbers that he put up in terms of, you know, at 308 pounds, you mentioned his 4.38 short shuttle, also had a 35-inch vertical, a 9.7 broad jump, and then the 1.74 split. Definitely impressive numbers. But is he a guy who's going to show up on tape to draft earlier than day 3?
Possibly. I mean, the thing with him is that apparently there are some character issues there. Maybe he's not the biggest team guy. I don't know. I've not really studied this. I read something earlier today which suggests he complained a lot about his playing time, wasn't happy when he didn't start a bowl game. I think he only played one or started one game in 2018. There are some issues there. The thing about the Seahawks under Pete Carroll and John Schneider is they kind of see that as a challenge. You know, they see the potential in players, are willing to bring them in. They've taken chances before. You know, we talked about the chance they took on Malik McDowell. Terrell Simon was a bit of a problem child at LSU. They'd taken him on. I'm sure that the people at Stanford probably had plenty of things to say about Richard Sherman back in the day. So, you know, they're not afraid of a challenge like this, a guy who's maybe got a challenging personality. I thought this was an interesting quote from Jim Nagy, the former Seahawks scout, on Twitter about Trysten Hill. He wrote on Twitter, 3 years ago, coaches and Scott Frost's UCF staff told me that Trysten Hill was the best player on the team as a true freshman. That team also had Shaquille and Shaquem, Traquan Smith and Jordan Akins. How did this kid not start for UCF this year? Looks great at the combine. So worth noting, Scott Frost wasn't the coach of the team last year. He left to join Nebraska. Maybe that's one of the reasons why Trysten Hill fell out of favor. Maybe didn't see eye to eye with the new head coach or whatever. Maybe some changes there led to him not starting. But he has got massive potential. It wasn't just the testing numbers that we've talked about here, Brandon. It was the drills as well. He looked really quick, really sharp. Great change of direction, his ability to get in and out the bags, good power. I thought he was one of the star performers of the day. And I bet the Seahawks have put a ring around this guy. They'll probably I imagine he will come in for a VMAC visit and they'll try and figure out a bit more about his personality and his character. And I won't be surprised at all if the Seahawks take a shot on him either in the middle rounds or on day 3.
Well, one of the guys on the defensive line who isn't on that group of short shuttle times is Ed Oliver. Unfortunately, we didn't get a time for him, but he was one of the top TEF testers in your group, but also a guy under 33-inch arms, which we know throughout the Seahawks drafting is they haven't picked a guy with under 33-inch arms at defensive line.
No, they haven't, and they've been pretty consistent with that. There is a reason for it. You know, length does matter when you are a pass rusher and you're trying to either disengage to make a play against the run, or you're trying to keep your frame clean and make a dart for the quarterback. There has to be a threshold at some point. You know, there's no point having a threshold if you're going to constantly say, we're going to make an exception for certain players. There will be times when you make an exception. I'm sure the Seahawks did for drafting a 5'10 quarterback in 2012. But those players have to really stand out. So, yeah, the arm length matters. All of the 10 players that are defensive ends or defensive tackles that we've highlighted from that group of 10 have all got plus 33-inch arms. So these are the names. You know, I'll read them again quickly to keep an eye on at this particular position. Nelson, Gary, Tillery, Allen, Amenahu, Wise, Kaminsky, Hill, Kingsley, Jones, and Wren. I will not be surprised at all if the Seahawks draft at least one of those 10 in the 2019 draft class.
Tillery seemed to be a guy that really stood out in the drills.
Absolutely. He was very athletic. I thought he had a fantastic day. He is he was recruited as a left tackle and then switched to play defensive line when he got to Notre Dame, and is an excellent athlete. You know, the agility that he showed with that great short stall showed up in the drills, was moving around so freely. He's got great hip flexion, could change direction. He's going to come into the league as a really athletic, bigger, 5 technique who can move inside. You could line him up in a whole variety of ways. He could play as a defensive end in a 3-4. He could probably play as a big 3 technique in a 4-3. He could play a little bit of end. I mean, there are lots of possibilities with him. Now, he's another guy who people have raised some questions about. He was described as a renaissance man by the NFL Network a little bit earlier today, which generally means that he is a bit of an intellectual. I think that's another way of referring to it. I don't see why that is necessarily a huge problem in itself. But then there was a counter from Rich Eisen on the NFL Network that can we stop sort of accusing intellectuals or Renaissance men and questioning their passion for football. And it's a fair point that Rich Eisen makes, but I think at the same time, you do have to make sure that these guys are absolutely dedicated to the job in hand. I mean, from my own personal point of view, I work for the BBC and I'm a football commentator, and I live and breathe that. And if I wasn't doing that, then I wouldn't expect to be able to do the job to the maximum of my ability. So there's nothing really wrong with football teams saying we want to make sure that the guys we're going to give millions of dollars to and spend our high draft picks on are absolutely dedicated to their craft as well. So I think it's a fair question to ask of someone like Jerry Tillery. He travels a lot. He's got interest outside of football. Teams will want to find out a little bit about what makes him tick. He's had a few character issues. He had a horrible game against USC where I think he stamped on somebody, quite a violent game. And he also liked some tweets. This is very 2019, Brandon. He liked some tweets suggesting that Notre Dame should appoint Les Miles and fire Brian Kelly. And then people picked up on the fact that he'd liked those tweets, and it created a little bit of a storm for a little while. But I think teams will try and work him out, find out what makes him tick. In terms of an athletic profile, he is fantastic and had a great day.
Well, and you mentioned, too, that he moved from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive line. And it just seems to me that generally offensive linemen are the more intellectual guys on the football team, too. So I don't see it as a knock either. I don't see how it could be a bad thing to be more of an intellectual type player. I mean, look at Michael Bennett, who, he struck me that way, too, and, was one of the best players on the Seahawks for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at I don't have a problem with it. I think the thing is that we never get a chance to actually sit in the meeting rooms of the combine with these teams and actually find out how these players really handle interaction and what their personalities are truly like. The teams have a lot more information. We can only second guess. We can only project certain things. So I'm not going to judge Jerry Tillery either way because I don't know the guy. I've never spoken to him. I've never had a meeting with him like the teams will have. I wonder if he's someone who will get into the VMAC as well. And, they like to get to know certain guys. And alongside, Trysten Hill, maybe Jerry Tillery will make a visit to Seattle. But it's a very, there's lots of different players. I mean, Zach Allen, as I mentioned earlier, to run a 4.36 and to have a great 3-cone as well. And a decent 10-yard split, a 1.65. And he's got the length, he's got the size. I just think that you have to kind of put him back on the radar a little bit now and go back and have another look at him because he really was one of the best pass rushers in 2018. He isn't that long Leo athletic speed rusher, but he's a great natural defensive end. And if the Seahawks want a bit of size at end with Clark on one side and Allen on the other, maybe find their speed in other areas, then that's something that they could consider that.
Well, we almost had a guy to put on the watch list with Kevin Givens early on, running what looked like a 1.59 10-yard split, and his unofficial 4.87 then adjusted to a 5.08 40-yard dash. So we can guess his 10-yard split was probably not that impressive.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a defensive tackle who's running a 1.5 in the 10-yard split, you just go ahead and put them in the top 5 of a draft straight away. I mean, that's incredible. And when it came up, it was an alarm bell went off there because I can't imagine there's possibly ever been a defensive tackle who was run a 1.59 before. That would probably have been a combine record. So, I think I'm not surprised that got corrected there. And sadly for him, he's not included on the list of players that we're talking about.
One of those guys who was on your list, your watch list, and you mentioned him as performing well in the short shuttle, was Renell Wren of Arizona State.
Yeah, he had a great workout. And the big thing with Renell is that he, on tape, has some amazing snaps, Brandon, where he will absolutely destroy a center. There was one game where he had the center down flat on his back like 2 or 3 times, was just dominating with power. with get off, with, his leverage was fantastic. And you just looked at him and thought, wow, who's this guy? This is one of the most impressive performances I've seen from a defensive tackle in a long time. But then you sort of continue to watch the tape and you see a lot of ugly plays as well, where he tries to run across the line, loses balance, gets shoved over, and he's rolling around on the turf while the other team's breaking off a big run. His rush lacks direction at times. He gives up run plays because his gap control and discipline is poor. He plays a little bit too out of control. And what you kind of want to see from him is you will take a few less of the decimating centre plays if you get a few more of the he just does his job plays. And I think that's the key from him. You don't really want to take away some of the brilliance that he has with this enormous frame and amazing athleticism and power. But you do want to, discipline and gap discipline is very important, especially for the Seahawks on their defensive line. One of the big things they're trying to change this year, according to Pete Carroll, is less explosive plays conceded on defense. And that means giving up fewer long runs as well as it does in the passing game. So I think this is something that they have to consider. If they end up drafting Renell Wren, they will have to believe that they can get him to be a more controlled defensive tackle. But he has everything. He has the size, he has the length, he has the explosive power, he's got the agility and the quickness. So he's a very fine prospect to consider maybe in round 2 or round 3.
One player that we didn't get some times on the 40-yard dash, on the 3-cone, Joe Jackson of Miami, but we did get a moment from him where he nearly ran through the Jets coach running drills. And so that made me laugh a little bit. But how did you feel about what you saw from him in today's drills?
It was a bit disappointing that he didn't run. There were a few guys where you just left scratching your head. It started with Ed Oliver, who decided he wasn't going to run. He was just going to do the jumps. And then obviously Dexter Lawrence got hurt, but it's not serious, so he gave in. Ja'Shea Polite had a poor run, then decided not to do anything else. Joe Jackson didn't run. Cleveland Ferrell didn't run. Christian Miller didn't look anywhere near 100%. And I think you have to give him a bit of credit for just going out there and competing in the drills. I'm not surprised. And I can think we can give him a pass for not running. Matt Wilson didn't run. And with Jackson, do you know one thing? They're talking a lot at the moment, Brandon, about changing the combine. So that it's going to be like a 2-week event, or it's going to be in LA or anything like this, make it more of a spectator event. You know what I'd like to see? I'd like to see a financial incentive for players to do every drill. So that, players, you come to the combine, we'll pay you. We'll pay you to be in the combine. It's an international event. Everybody's watching you. You deserve to be paid because you're pro prospects now. You deserve to receive some money for working out. And here's the sum, and everyone will get the same, but you've got to do every drill. And if you don't do all of the drills, then you don't get the money. And I think that some kind of system like that, I guess the injured players might complain that they're missing out. I don't know if there's a way of absolving that, and that might be the thing that trips this idea up. But I'd like to see some financial incentive to get these guys doing all the drills, because I feel like as people who are trying to analyze the draft and we're trying to discuss it now, we kind of haven't got the full picture. You're asking me about Joe Jackson. I don't really know what to say, because he had a weird day. He looked fine in the drills. I think he had something like a 27.5-inch vertical, which is poor. It's not explosive at all, but then had quite an explosive broad jump. So I came away with more questions than answers from Joe Jackson. And what you kind of want this event to be is a question answerer. So how does he compare to a Ferrell, to a Rashan Gary, to a Zach Allen? Where does he fit in? I mean, we've seen Brian Burns had an amazing workout. Montez Sweat had an amazing workout. We'll come on to those guys in a second. How does Joe Jackson compare to them? And I kind of feel like we leave the combine and none of us really know. So hopefully he's going to do all of the tests at his pro day and we will get some clarity there.
Well, one guy we got some clarity on as moving up the draft board was Montez Sweat, a guy who ran extremely well, 4.41 and a 1.55 10-yard split. We got to see him running with guys like Odell Beckham and Ezekiel Elliott when they do the side-by-side or the overlay of the three runners. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was amazing. Montez Sweat really sort of stole the weekend away from DK Metcalf. To run a 4.41 at 260 pounds, that is absolutely incredible. It's just unfathomable how good that is. The thing with Sweat, and this is the thing, and we talked about it with Metcalf yesterday. You see something like that, you see an amazing 40-yard dash time that is unique, and you don't see it very often at all. And your instant reaction to it is to think this guy's now going to go in the top 10 or this guy's going to go in the top 15 or however early you want to put that. You have to sort of just take a step back from stuff like this, because while that is an amazing 40-yard dash, when you're watching the drills, something showed up that shows up on tape. He's stiff in space. He's limited. They didn't even ask him, I don't think, he didn't do the linebacker drills, whether that's because he chose not to or whether it's because they didn't ask him to do it, but he didn't do it. And moving in space, he's not good. I mean, there was some real hip stiffness there on his back pedal. When he has to turn and run in space or do any of the coverage drills, he didn't look comfortable doing it. And that was a complete contrast to Brian Burns, for example, who looked like an absolute natural doing that. So what does this mean for Montez Sweat? It means that he's really fast running in a straight line, which he's never nearly ever going to do because he's not a wide receiver running go routes. He's going to be the short area quickness. He's got a great 10-yard split, so you give him a thumbs up for that and you say it's not an issue, but he's a straight line guy. It means that as a speed rusher, which we've seen on the tape, he's very effective. He's got amazing length, like 36 inch arms. He does a better job in the run game than some players of his size, and he's going to create some pressure and get you some sacks. But the 3-4 teams aren't going to probably consider him too much because he can't play as a 3-4 outside linebacker. He has to play defensive end. And then the 4-3 teams will go, okay, love his speed, but do I really want a 260-pound defensive end in a 4-3? Because, ideally you have a 270, 275-pound guy there. And is he going to be able to be a consistently good run defender? Is he going to be able to seal the edge if you're playing him at 260 pounds in the 4-3? So, yep, the speed and that a brilliant 40-yard dash says, shove this guy in your top 10 in your mock draft on Monday because that's where he's going to go. The tape and some of the drills show up that, hang on a minute, there is still a chance that he could last a little bit longer than people think here. It wasn't a flawless performance by Montez Sweat. And although there's a very good chance because of that 40, he will go in the top 20 and that someone will just be enamored by that amazing speed, there is still a chance, in my opinion, that he could last later into the first round.
Well, he was one of 5 edge rushers who did run in the 1.5s for the 10-yard splits, and a key time that I know that you look for the Seahawks, Rob. So you have Sweat with a 1.55. You got Ben Banagou. You got Brian Burns, Jamal Davis, and Chase Winovich, which is a guy with under 33-inch arms, but I think he's pretty close.
Yeah, so to sort of just take a step back on that as well, I mean, the 1.5 10-yard split is what is considered an elite 10-yard split for an edge rusher. Cliff Avon ran a 1.50, Bruce Irvin ran a 1.55. It's a good way to judge who's got that amazing burst off the line. Montez Sweat ran a 1.55, as you mentioned there, but only 4 others managed it within this class, which is it's not bad. I mean, there were very few 1.5 runners last year. It was slim pickings there. This is a little bit better, but it's not amazing. And at the start of the podcast, when you're saying, it was a good day, but not quite living up to expectations, I was kind of hoping we'd see quite a few more 1.5, when people like Ja'Shea Polite maybe could have got into there, or even a Cleveland Ferrell, or, players like that could have also got into that range. So, Sweat, if he's there, if he's not there for the Seahawks, it leaves those 4 other names. Chase Winovich has got 32 3/4-inch arms. Not quite sure whether the Seahawks will say he's below the threshold. He's only a 1/4 of an inch. It's not that much difference, but you wouldn't describe him as a long, lean Leo, Chase Winovich. That's just not him. He's probably better off playing in a 3-4, an outside linebacker like Clay Matthews did. He compares quite a lot to Clay Matthews, not just the long hair. They are very similar players. I've put in my review piece today a comparison between the two, and they have similar physical profiles. And I think Winovich's best fit is to go to a team like Green Bay, who've used Clay Matthews, or New England, or some of these other teams that like to get their pass rushers in space. And that might be a better fit for him than the Seahawks, where he would have to play Leo or Sam. I just don't see that as a great fit for him. So if you're going to take him to one side, and if Sweat's not going to be there potentially, you're kind of looking at Banagou, Burns, and Davis. Burns had an amazing workout, ran very, very well. The big thing for him was he's 249 pounds. There was a lot of talk during the season that he actually played the season at Florida State in the 220s. And wow. NFL.com listed him at 227 pounds as an estimate going into the combine. So the fact that he weighed in 20 pounds heavier than that is a big plus. The fact that he also ran very well with that extra size, had an explosive workout and looked incredibly smooth in drills is also another good sign. So is Brian Burns going to be there for the Seahawks if they trade down? Is he still going to be there? Some people will put him in the top 20 after today. Again, similar to what I said with Montez Sweat, he's better in space. And he could be potentially a 3-4 outside linebacker as well as a pass rusher for teams like Seattle. The problem with Burns is he is undersized. He's 249 pounds. Is he going to play at 249 or is he going to go back to playing at like 235, 240? Can he hold up against the running game? Can you play him on early downs? These are questions that teams are going to answer. And it may mean that a player like Brian Burns lasts a bit longer than people imagine. So he's a potential option for the Seahawks. Ben Banogu had an unbelievable workout. So an amazing vertical, like 40-inch vertical, a 1.5 split, a great 40, short shuttle and 3-cone, really good. He was one of the stars of the day, and he's certainly a player that I'm going to go back and have a look at after the combine.
Well, and you pointed out, too, that when you put him into the TEF formula, he was over a 4. And I think, was there one other guy who had scored over a 4 in the last couple of years?
Yeah, a guy named Myles Garrett, who was the number 1 overall pick a couple of years ago. So that's good company. He's the only other player to score a 4.0 or higher in TEF in all of that time, in the 4 years that we've done it. So it's very impressive from him. And again, I'm going to go and have another look at him. I suspect that he's probably boosted his stock by at least a round based on what he did at the combine. The fact that there aren't many elite athletes at edge rusher this year potentially means that he could even go a couple of rounds higher than he otherwise would have done. He's a player that I need to have a look at. If he's there in the middle rounds, though, could be a player the Seahawks certainly have a good long look at.
Where do you put a player like Justin Hollins from Oregon? Because he's more of an edge type guy, but he was a guy who ran with the linebackers.
Yeah, he ran with the linebackers, which was frustrating because he isn't going to be, I don't think, a linebacker. I mean, he's very much in that. If Chase Winovich is working out with the defensive lineman, why the heck isn't Justin Hollins working out with them? I mean, it doesn't really make any sense to me. And the other disappointing thing was that the NFL Network didn't show the 10-yard splits for the linebackers. So
right.
We don't know what his 10-yard split is. We do know that he ran a very good 40 time, like a 4.50, which is very impressive. He had a 4.40 in the short shuttle, which isn't that amazing. It's not a terrible time either. He's somebody who had a 36.5-inch vertical, 7.06 in the 3-cone, fits with the Seahawks. So he is somebody, again, who, if they're looking for a Leo, it'd be nice to know his 10-yard split time is. But if they're looking for a Leo, maybe in those middle rounds, he is a name to go with Banogu, Brian Burns, Jamal Davis, Montez Sweat, Chase Winovich, potentially depending on the arm length. He's another player that could be on the radar for the Seahawks because he ticks every other box. You just don't know what his 10-yard split is.
You mentioned Jamal Davis out of Akron, and, he did have that 1.58 10-yard split, with the 4.5 40 for Hollins. You'd have to think that he must be in the 1.5 range. But let's talk about Davis out of Akron. What do you like about him? And is he, a late round, day 3 type option, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. He kind of looked like some of the other guys that they've taken later on who have got that kind of linebacker, defensive end potential. He looked very, very athletic, minimal body fat, in great shape, has got the length, has got the size, moved around the field very well, decent tester when he had to work in space. I liked the look of him. It was sort of my first introduction to him today. And look, you weren't blown. You didn't look at him and think, "Wow, who's this guy?" Look at his power, and he wasn't quite as fast as some of the other guys. He didn't put on the same kind of show as a Sweat or a Burns, for example, or a Banogu. But certainly a player to go back and have another look at. And on day 3, if they wanted to add another pass rusher, or even if they hadn't drafted one at that point, he's somebody with potential that they could work on and develop. He had a decent day today, and somebody that I need to go and study a little bit more in the future.
Well, that brings us to linebackers, Rob. Outside of Devin White of LSU, Devin Bush of Michigan, was there really anybody that stood out to you?
No, there wasn't. And the big takeaway from this is that the Seahawks better have a plan at linebacker. They need to come up with solutions in free agency. Either they have to re-sign KJ Wright, they either have to re-sign Michael Kendricks, assuming he avoids jail, or they have to go and sign another veteran linebacker, because they ain't going to find an option in this draft, unfortunately. Again, it's another poor linebacker draft, same as last year. There's just nothing that spectacular about it. I know that the guys on the NFL Network kept saying over and over again, it's a really fast group. Look how fast these linebackers are running. They were celebrating linebackers running a 4.70. That is not a fast time for a linebacker, I'm sorry, not in the modern NFL. The Deion Joneses and the Tevin Smiths and the Bobby Wagners, That's where we're at these days. It is not about 4.75s in the 40 for linebackers. That is not fast. I don't know if they got a little bit confused with the defensive line drills earlier and were sort of in the mindset that a 4.7 was okay. It ain't okay for linebackers, and they kept saying it over and over again. This was a really bang average linebacker workout today with, as you mentioned, two absolute studs who are probably going to go in the top 20. Devin Bush and Devin White ran early high 4.4s. It was like a 4.42 and a 4.43. They both jumped about 40 inches in the vertical. Their agility testing was really good. Their tape, I think Devin White's better than Devin Bush, but Bush struggles a little bit in coverage and in the run game, but it just flies to the ball and is so physical and is the definition of a modern day NFL linebacker. And I think that those two guys will go very early. And when they've gone, good luck finding anybody else. There wasn't anybody in this class really who stood up to me and said, you can plug them in as a 2019 starter for the Seahawks at the will. It's a big concern. I know they've been looking for linebackers for a couple of years. Pete Carroll stated he was very keen on adding some youth at the position, but their type of players just haven't been available in the draft classes. And I suspect that this year they're going to have to put a Band-Aid on this again.
The only two guys for me that I thought might be on the edge of guys that the Seahawks could consider, not early on with their first picks, but, potentially Bobby Okereke out of Stanford and Drew Tranquill of Notre Dame.
Bobby Okereke is an interesting one because he's got really good length, and the little that I saw of him at the Senior Bowl and a little bit of tape as well, there's certainly some potential there, and they do like length, and KJ Wright had great arms, and that's one of the reasons why they took him, along with his character and his intensity and everything that KJ has shown to be. The problem that we've got here, and I wrote this in the review, is that they always go for athleticism. So Kevin Pierre-Louis, Corey Toomer, Malcolm Smith, Eric Pinkins, Bobby Wagner, Shaquem Griffin, these are all elite athletes. And the only one exception they've ever drafted who hasn't been is KJ Wright, who ran a 4.71.
Right.
So he's the rare exception. But it's difficult to identify anomalies. It's hard to sort of run through the list and go, well, just because he's got long arms, he may be the next KJ Wright. I can't say that with any conviction, and I'm not quite sure I could, if I go back to 2011, for example, and watch KJ Wright, I'm not sure that I could identify on tape, this is why they're going to take him, or this is what they're going to love about him. I think he was just a player that they fell in love with during the process, and they may well have fallen in love with a different linebacker this year. My hunch, though, is that they won't have done, and that they're going to find it very difficult to find a solution here. Perhaps it's also one of the reasons why Carroll was speaking quite positively about KJ and saying how much they want to keep him, because perhaps internally that may not be likely, but internally Pete Carroll might be absolutely desperate to keep KJ Wright because they know that they're not going to find a solution in this draft, presuming that White and Bush are off the board. And it's also maybe another reason why they've talked about bringing Michael Kendricks back, but they need a solution there. They can't go into the 2019 season hoping that Austin Calitro or Shaquem Griffin's going to be the solution, or that whoever they can pick up in the fourth or fifth wave of free agency, that is going to be able to fill a hole here. I think they showed with Kendricks and Wright in the team, they're a much better defense. They need at least one of those guys, maybe another one as well, and they've got to go out and do something here, because I don't think this draft class is going to provide the answers. I mean, it's not to say that there was a completely woeful session. I mean, Ben Burr-Kirvin from Washington had a very good workout and was much better in the agility testing and in terms of his 40 than I expected he was going to be. Is he a starting will at the next level, though? I think that's massively debatable. Gary Johnson at Texas ran a 4.43, which is incredibly quick, but he's undersized at 226. I've not studied him, but Lance Zierlein wrote about him in the NFL.com profile, saying he's an active inside linebacker with plenty of passion and aggression, but a fundamental lack of NFL caliber movement skills in space, which makes it sound like a bit of an issue if you're going to be playing the will. I think it was a linebacker group that yet again has shown that it hasn't got depth and not a lot of Seahawky options in there. And I just wonder whether they're going to have to find alternative solutions here.
Well, one guy who was on your watch list who we didn't see was Bosa Joseph. What was his story at not participating in the combine today?
Didn't hear a word on him. I have no idea why he wasn't working out. And, they did a pretty good job, the NFL Network, of letting us know who wasn't going to be performing. There was no word at all on him. So whether or not he's picked up an injury, whether he's ill, whether he's just waiting for his pro day, I'm not too sure. But he's quick, he's aggressive, he's undersized, but sort of plays beyond his size a little bit. I was looking forward to seeing him because I thought he might be somebody who could potentially run a really quick 40 time and have some explosive testing. But we'll never know unless he does a pro day at Florida, because he didn't do anything today.
So it's not looking like linebacker would be a spot for the Seahawks to draft with their first pick overall, unless it's one of those guys, one of the two Devons that falls to the bottom of the first round, and they probably won't.
Yeah, I mean, Devin White certainly won't. Devin Bush, I mean, I guess you could...
And he's under 6 feet, too, which is... Yeah. But they did pick up Kevin Pierre-Louis, so it's not... I guess you can't say that's a deal breaker.
And Michael Kendricks was 5'11" as well. So, and he has a very similar profile to Devin Bush, actually, Michael Kendricks, when he did his combine in 2012. So I think the thing with Bush is that it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he could last to the late first or even the early second. Michael Kendricks lasted to the second round. Bobby Wagner lasted to the second round. They were great athletes. His ability in coverage is not what you'd expect for a guy who runs a 4.43. He does have some struggles there. He was a little too aggressive at the line of scrimmage for Michigan and would try and guess what an offense or a running back was going to do, and would leave holes that would enable big runs to be broken off. But he just flies to the ball carrier, hits with power, great tackler, great blitzer, playmaker. And for those reasons, I just think, Carolina have cut ties with Thomas Davis, and they love to draft linebackers. Are they going to draft Devin Bush there? Would the Redskins look at him at 15? Possibly. You go down to Tennessee, could potentially have a look at him there. And there are teams even in the 20s that could have a lot of interest in Devin Bush. So the idea that he would fall into the 30s after Seattle's trade, inevitably traded down, is a stretch. But look, the good thing about this is that Seattle is going to trade down, and whenever they do make a pick, there are at least some amazing athletes that could last. They're not all going to go in the top 20. So you've got your DK Metcalf, who had a great run. Paris Campbell had a great workout. Terry McLaurin had a great workout. Chris Lindstrom had a great workout. Andre Dillard had a great workout. There's loads of tight ends that you could highlight. And then today we've seen Brian Burns, we've seen Montez Sweat. The Seahawks love special, freaky, traity athletes with their first pick usually. The good thing is, from the first 3 days, is that we've seen a lot of these players. Now, from a Seahawks point of view, just got to hope that one's going to be there when they pick.
Well, coming up tomorrow, we have the corners along with the other defensive backs, and to look at. I'm curious. You've got the measurements now on the corners. I'm curious of who we need to look for tomorrow. And also, a couple days ago, we talked about running backs, and you only had 4 in your group, and you expanded your list to 7. I kind of want to talk about who those other 3 guys are too. But why don't we start off with corners? Which players with the size profile that the Seahawks are looking for should we be watching in the combine?
Yeah, there's a decent list here of players who have got the arm length, which everybody knows by now is 32-inch arms is their threshold. They don't draft cornerbacks who are sub 5'11" in height, preferably even taller than that. 6 foot and above is the ideal. And, above average wingspan is important as well. So when I'm looking at the players, there's quite a long list of guys who fit into that category. Some surprising names as well. Didn't expect to see DeAndre Baker at 5'11" with 32-inch arms and a 77-inch wingspan, but he's there. I think the names that stand out to me are Lonnie Johnson, who is 6'2", 32.5-inch arms, 77.5-inch wingspan, has revealed on Twitter today that he was the latest victim of a Seahawks stare-out competition in a meeting with the team.
Yes.
Michael Dixon did it a year ago, and Lonnie Johnson has today revealed that he did the same thing with the Seahawks. He met with them this weekend, and they asked him for a stare-out. So maybe we can already put his name next to the Seahawks as the same with Michael Dixon last year. Maybe they only saved that test for the guys they really want. So Lonnie Johnson there, and he's a Seahawks corner. Justin Lane, 6'2", 33-inch arms, a great 80-inch wingspan plus. Great size, great length from Justin Lane. Certainly expect that he's going to be on the radar. Jamal Peters, 6'2", 32.5-inch arms, 77.5-inch wingspan. Just looks like a Seahawks corner. Physical, former safety who's converted to corner. Really like the look of him. Savion Smith from Alabama, 6'1", 33.5-inch arms, 79-inch wingspan. Really good-looking cornerback. Alabama coached, so Nick Saban knows how to coach defensive backs. So perhaps a player that they will look at there. Jojan Williams could go a little bit too early for the Seahawks, but he's really long, really tall, has got the kind of frame that they love. Mike Jackson at Miami, 6'1", 32.5-inch arms, decent-looking guy. Rock Ya-Sin has maybe not quite got the lean length that they love, but he has got the size, 6 foot, 32-inch arms. There's a few other names as well, but the good thing is that there's a whole host of possible options here for the Seahawks, and almost certain that they'll take a cornerback at some point in the draft.
And people can check that out at SeahawksDraftBlog.com. With Ya-Sin, I have a feeling he's just going to be overdrafted based on his name. He's going to go a lot earlier than he otherwise would.
It's a great name, Rock Ya-Sin. It's a name that I can imagine selling quite a few jerseys,
right? And
that matters in the NFL. So you're probably right. He'll probably go around early because of the name.
Well, how about running backs? Going back to the first day, you expanded your list to 7, and there were a couple other names that showed up.
Yeah, I don't know. I must have been just suffering from exhaustion or something at the end of the day. And it was your kind self mentioned Miles Sanders. And I thought, hey, I missed some guys here, and went back and I'd missed more than one. So the other players that I've added to the list now are Miles Sanders, 5'11", 211 pounds, 36-inch vertical, 10'4" broad. I don't know if I just missed the size there or sort of read it as a 201, but yeah, he's in the ballpark there and had a great workout. And I've added him to the list. I think Dexter Williams was one of the others that I added there. 5'11", 212, 36-inch vertical, 10'10" broad. Has had some character concerns. Had dyed his hair green for the combine as well, which was particularly, I thought it looked pretty cool. I wish that I could do that. And he is in that ballpark as well. I'm just not sure. I mean, there was some talk about him maybe being a bit of an issue in Notre Dame, so I'm not sure that he'll necessarily be a guy to look at. And then Tony Pollard, who kind of just squeezed in there. I've included him on the list. I was kind of wondering whether I should create a nearly list because he is only 210 pounds, but he's 6 foot, 35-inch vertical, 10'1" broad. Not amazing testing numbers, not amazing size, but certainly watching him on tape was a player that I liked, and converted receiver. So I chucked him on the list as well. So there's 7 names now in total instead of 4. The previous 4 were Alex Barnes, Damian Harris, Alexander Mattison, LJ Scott. I will say this though, I think that given Seattle only has 4 picks, they're going to try and turn it into 7 or 8 over the course of draft day, assuming they don't trade anybody because they don't really have anybody to trade at the moment. Assuming they try and get to 7 or 8. The depth and the quality on the O-line, tight end, receiver, D-line class makes me wonder if there's going to be any room for a running back this year, and especially because they're probably going to want to add competition and depth at defensive back as well. We're going to see those guys work out tomorrow. May want to draft 1 quarterback, may draft 2, may look at the safety position. It's a bit of a weak year for safeties. I just wonder whether or not there's going to be any room for a draft pick at running back this year, and maybe if they do add one, it'll be an undrafted free agent. Maybe it'll be a fullback rather than a running back. Maybe Alec Ingold or Trevon Wesco or one of the tight ends that they could use as maybe an H-back is perhaps a more likely fit. And what does that mean for the running back position? Well, perhaps they re-sign Mike Davis or go and get somebody else who can be like the third wheel for the running back position, because they've kind of made their investment with Rashad Penny and Chris Carson. They clearly like Mike Davis. I like Mike Davis. I hope he's back. And if that happens, then I think maybe we just write off running back this year in terms of the draft.
Well, you mentioned they could go undrafted free agent. Alex Barnes on that list from Kansas State is a guy who will probably fall outside of the draft, and maybe they go and get him or a player like him.
Yeah, possibly so. I think the one that I quite like the most, and I had watched him before the combine, unlike Alex Barnes and Miles Sanders and some of the others, is Alexander Mattison at Boise State. Really physical, has kind of got that wide-legged stance that Marshawn Lynch had, runs tough, finishes runs, scored a load of touchdowns for Boise State. So I think that Mattison is a guy that if they are going to take one, I think that he is the one that, based on what I've seen so far, is someone that I could really get behind. But I'll take a look at some of the others I really like Damian Harris. I just think he's going to go a bit too early for the Seahawks. We go in the first 3 rounds. But Mattison is a guy that, having watched him before, that I really liked.
Well, Rob, really want to thank you for joining us once again. 3 days in a row, coming up day 4 tomorrow. And folks can tune back in. Follow you on Twitter at Rob Staton, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. And of course, if they want to support either your efforts or the efforts of the podcast, you got Patreon.com/SeahawksDraftBlog and GetInTheFlock.com for the podcast. Rob, thanks once again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.